radiant smile, and melodic laugh. Luke had built this life meticulously. At 35, he was a successful construction company owner, having transformed his father's small contracting business into a multi-million-dollar empire. His calloused hands had laid the foundation for dozens of homes across the state, but none meant more to him than this one, the sanctuary he'd built for his family. Victoria Shepherd, née Hopper, had been the belle of their small town when they met 12 years ago. Her auburn hair and emerald eyes had captivated him instantly, but it was her apparent devotion to family values that had convinced him she was the one. She'd given up her job as a real estate agent when Emma was born, claiming she wanted to focus entirely on motherhood. "Daddy, look what Mommy got me." Emma's voice snapped Luke from his reverie. She held up an elegant pink dress, far more sophisticated than her usual play clothes. The fabric shimmered under the living room lights, and intricate beading adorned the neckline. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Luke said, though something nagged at him. The dress looked expensive, more expensive than Victoria usually spent on Emma's clothes. They lived comfortably, but Victoria had always been practical about spending. Craig Willard, their neighbor and Emma's godfather, leaned against the fireplace mantel, his dark eyes fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made Luke's jaw tighten. Craig was a smooth-talking insurance adjuster who'd moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago. He'd quickly ingratiated himself with the family, especially after Victoria insisted they needed someone trustworthy to handle their insurance needs. "Victoria has exquisite taste," Craig said, his voice carrying that practiced charm that had always irritated Luke. "Emma looks like a little princess." Luke noticed the way Craig's gaze lingered on his wife, and how Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. He'd been noticing these small moments more frequently lately. Whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, Victoria's newfound interest in yoga classes that seemed to run longer each week, and Craig's convenient appearances whenever Luke was away on business. The party continued with forced normalcy. Luke played the role of the doting father and loving husband, but his mind cataloged every interaction between Victoria and Craig. When Craig offered to help clean up, Victoria accepted too eagerly. When their hands briefly touched while gathering plates, the contact lasted a fraction too long. As the last guest departed, Luke retreated to his home office. The room reflected his methodical nature. Construction blueprints organized by date, financial records filed with military precision, and family photos displaying their seemingly perfect life. He'd built his success on attention to detail, and those same instincts now screamed that something was fundamentally wrong in his own home. Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing her new dress. "Daddy, will you help me hang this up? Mommy said I should take extra special care of it." "Of course, princess." Luke followed his daughter to her room, his heart aching at her innocent trust. Whatever was happening between Victoria and Craig, Emma was caught in the middle. As Luke carefully removed the dress, his fingers detected something unusual. The fabric near the waist felt thicker, as if something was sewn inside. His construction experience had taught him to notice structural irregularities, and this dress definitely had one. "Emma, why don't you get ready for bed? I'll make sure this is hung up properly." After Emma left the bathroom, Luke examined the dress more closely. Hidden in the seam was a small, carefully concealed pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he worked to open it without damaging the fabric. Inside, he found a folded piece of paper and what appeared to be a small key. The paper contained an address he didn't recognize and a date, tomorrow's date. Below that, in Victoria's handwriting, "Last chance to back out. After tomorrow, there's no going back." Luke's world tilted. 10 years of marriage, and he'd never seen this handwriting style. Hurried, desperate, unlike Victoria's usual careful script. The key was small, possibly for a safety deposit box or storage unit. "Daddy," Emma's voice called from the bathroom. "I'm ready for you to read me a story." Luke quickly refolded the paper and pocketed it along with the key. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Coming, sweetheart." As he read Emma her bedtime story, Luke's mind raced. The address, the key, the hidden pocket in an expensive dress given to an 8-year-old. None of it made sense. But every instinct he developed through years of business dealings told him he was looking at evidence of betrayal. Victoria appeared in the doorway as Luke finished the story. "Thank you for such a wonderful party, Daddy," Emma whispered, hugging him tightly. "Anything for my princess," Luke replied, kissing her forehead. Over Emma's head, he met Victoria's eyes. She smiled at him, the same loving smile he'd cherished for years, but now it felt like a mask. "Such a special dress," Luke said carefully. "Where did you find it?" Victoria's smile never wavered. "A little boutique downtown. I thought Emma deserved something extraordinary for her 8th birthday." The lie came so smoothly that Luke realized this wasn't Victoria's first deception. How many other lies had he accepted without question? How long had he been living in a carefully constructed illusion? That night, Luke lay beside his sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling. The woman next to him breathed softly, occasionally murmuring in her sleep. Once those sounds had comforted him. Now, they felt like evidence of secrets he'd never been meant to discover. Tomorrow, he would investigate the address. Tonight, he would begin planning his response to whatever truth awaited him. Luke Shepard had built his fortune by never backing down from a challenge, and he had no intention of starting now. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Luke left for his construction site before dawn, but instead of heading to the job, he drove to the address from the hidden note. The early morning mist clung to the industrial district as he located the building, a nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of town. The key from Emma's dress opened Unit 247. Inside, Luke found a meticulously organized collection that shattered his understanding of his life. Photographs of him leaving and entering buildings, detailed schedules of his daily routines, and copies of business documents he'd never shared with Victoria filled several boxes. But the most devastating discovery was a manila folder labeled Insurance Claims L. Shepard. Inside were photographs of his construction sites, but not ordinary progress photos. These images focused on safety violations, structural weaknesses, and potential hazard points. Alongside them were detailed reports written in Craig's professional handwriting, documenting problems that could lead to accidents or lawsuits. Luke's hands shook as he read Craig's notes. Target completion dates for maximum impact, optimal timing for structural failure, and most chilling, life insurance benefits activation timeline. A leather journal in Victoria's handwriting revealed the true scope of their betrayal. Entry after entry detailed their 3-year affair and their systematic plan to destroy Luke's business reputation and potentially his life. They'd been documenting his work sites, looking for opportunities to create accidents that would trigger massive insurance payouts. The final entry, dated just a week ago, made Luke's blood run cold. C says the Riverside project has the perfect setup. Electrical issues on the 3rd floor could cause a fire during L's usual evening walkthrough. Insurance will pay double if it's deemed an accident. Emma will never remember him anyway. She'll have a real father who actually loves her. Luke photographed everything with methodical precision, his construction background serving him well in documenting evidence. But the real shock came in the final box: medical records and DNA test results. Emma wasn't his daughter. The test was dated 3 months after her birth, meaning Victoria had known from the beginning. 9 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees he'd bandaged, first steps he'd cheered, all built on a lie. The little girl who called him daddy belonged to Craig Willard. Luke's phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Missing you already. Can't wait for tonight's romantic dinner. Love you, husband." The casual cruelty of her deception ignited something cold and calculating in Luke's chest. He'd spent years building projects that required patience, precision, and long-term planning. Now he would apply those same skills to something far more personal. Back at his office, Luke reviewed the evidence with the same methodical approach he used for complex construction projects. Victoria and Craig had made one crucial mistake. They'd documented everything, probably to ensure they could execute their plan perfectly. Their attention to detail would become their downfall. Luke's foreman, Wilson Compton, knocked on the office door. Wilson was a loyal employee who'd worked with Luke for 8 years, and more importantly, he had a background in demolition before joining the construction crew. "Boss, you look like hell." Everything okay? Luke made a decision that would set his revenge in motion. Wilson, I need to ask you something, and I need complete confidentiality. How would someone create a controlled structural failure that looked accidental? Wilson's weathered face grew serious. That's a dangerous question, boss. Why would you need to know something like that? Luke handed Wilson the photographs from his storage unit. Because my wife and her lover have been planning to kill me for 3 years, and I'm going to make sure they face the consequences. Wilson studied the images with growing horror. Jesus Christ, Luke. They were planning to bring down the Riverside site with you in it, along with anyone else who happened to be there, Luke confirmed. Craig's an insurance adjuster. He knows exactly how to make it look accidental and maximize the payouts. What do you need from me? I need you to help me give them exactly what they want, but not how they expect it. That afternoon, Luke returned home to find Victoria preparing for their romantic dinner. She'd chosen a red dress that hugged her curves, and her makeup was flawless. Looking at her now, knowing what he knew, Luke marveled at how convincing her performance was. You look stunning, he said, and meant it. Even knowing she was planning his murder, Victoria remained beautiful. The knowledge made her betrayal sting worse. I made reservations at Romano's, she said, kissing his cheek. Emma's staying at my sister's tonight. Of course she was. Luke realized Victoria had been systematically isolating him from Emma for weeks, preparing his daughter for his absence. Emma had been spending more nights away, taking special trips with her aunt. Victoria was gradually erasing Luke from his daughter's life. At dinner, Victoria was particularly affectionate, touching his hand across the table and gazing into his eyes with practiced sincerity. Luke played his part, but inside, his mind cataloged every calculated gesture. Craig stopped by today, Victoria mentioned casually. He's concerned about some irregularities in our insurance coverage. He wants to meet with you tomorrow about updating our policies. There was the setup. Tomorrow was the date from the storage unit note. They planned to finalize whatever would trigger their plan against him. Of course, Luke replied smoothly. I trust Craig's professional judgment. Victoria's smile brightened. I'm so glad you two get along. He really cares about our family security. That night, as Victoria slept beside him, Luke finalized his own plan. Tomorrow, Craig and Victoria would get exactly what they'd been working toward for 3 years. But Luke Shepard had built his reputation on delivering projects that exceeded expectations, and his final project would be no exception. He pulled out his phone and sent Wilson a coded text. Morning demo starts at sunrise. Bring the special equipment. By tomorrow evening, Victoria and Craig would understand that Luke Shepard never forgave betrayal, and he never forgot those who tried to destroy what he'd built. Chapter 3. The Foundation. Luke arrived at his office before 6 a.m., his mind sharp despite the sleepless night. He'd spent years learning that successful construction required meticulous planning and perfect timing. Today, he would apply those same principles to a very different kind of project. Wilson was already waiting with 2 other trusted crew members, Owen Cantu, Luke's demolition specialist, and Gerald Williams, who handled electrical work. All 3 men had worked with Luke for years and owed their livelihoods to his leadership. Gentlemen, Luke began, spreading the photographs from the storage unit across his desk. What you're about to see stays in this room. These are images of a conspiracy to commit murder. My murder. The men studied the evidence in stunned silence. Owen spoke first. Boss, this is insane. They've been planning this for years. Craig knows our procedures, our safety protocols, everything, Gerald added, examining the electrical sabotage plans. He's got detailed knowledge of every site. Luke nodded grimly, which is why we're going to use his own plan against him. Victoria and Craig think they're meeting me at the Riverside site tonight to finalize their scheme. Instead, they're going to walk into a demonstration of what happens when someone threatens my family. Wilson leaned forward. What exactly are you planning, Luke? Craig's an insurance expert. He knows how to create accidents that look natural. But I know construction, and I know how to create controlled situations that serve my purposes. Luke pulled out architectural plans for the Riverside project. They want a structural failure? They'll get one, but not the kind they're expecting. Luke's plan was methodical and brutal. The Riverside site was a 12-story office building under construction, currently empty except for basic structural elements. Craig's plan involved weakening support beams on the third floor to cause an accidental collapse during Luke's evening walkthrough. But Luke had a different idea. Using his knowledge of the building's design, he would create a trap that would isolate Craig and Victoria in a section of the building where they couldn't escape. Then he would demonstrate exactly what a real structural failure looked like. Owen, I need you to prepare charges for floors 4 through 7. Small ones, just enough to seal the stairwells after our guests arrive. You want to trap them inside? Owen asked. I want them to experience the fear they plan to put me through. Luke replied coldly. Gerald, can you rig the electrical systems to cut power to those floors on command? Easy enough. What about cameras? I want everything recorded. When this is over, I want proof of exactly what Victoria and Craig are capable of. Luke's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Can't wait for tonight. Craig says he has exciting news about our future together. The casual cruelty of her words, referencing their future while planning his death, hardened Luke's resolve. He texted back, looking forward to it. This will be a night we'll never forget. Meanwhile, Luke had been making other preparations. He'd withdrawn large amounts of cash from various accounts and transferred assets to offshore holdings Wilson had helped him establish years ago for tax purposes. If tonight went as planned, Luke would need to disappear for a while. He also made arrangements for Emma. Through his lawyer, he'd prepared documents revealing Victoria's adultery and the DNA evidence proving Emma wasn't his biological daughter. But more importantly, he'd established a trust fund that would ensure Emma's education and care, regardless of what happened to Victoria. Luke wasn't interested in destroying an innocent child, even if she wasn't biologically his. Emma had been the one pure thing in his life, and he would protect her future even as he eliminated the threats to his own. At 4 p.m., Craig called Luke directly. Hey buddy, I hope you don't mind Victoria mentioning our meeting tonight. I've discovered some serious concerns about your insurance coverage. What kind of concerns? Luke asked, playing ignorant. It's complicated. Better if we discuss it in person. Can you meet us at the Riverside site around 8 p.m.? I want to show you exactly what vulnerabilities I've identified. Of course. I appreciate you looking out for my interests. Craig's laugh was too hearty, too practiced. That's what friends are for, right? Victoria, and I just want to make sure you're protected. After hanging up, Luke smiled coldly. Craig was right. Tonight would definitely be about protection. Just not the kind he expected. Luke spent the remaining hours making final preparations. He armed himself with a Glock 19 he'd legally purchased years ago for site security. He also prepared a detailed confession that Victoria and Craig would sign before this night ended, assuming they survived long enough to sign anything. As evening approached, Luke found himself thinking about the life he'd built and was about to abandon. 10 years of marriage, 9 years of believing Emma was his daughter, 3 years of unknowingly living with a woman who planned his death. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. But Luke had learned long ago that in construction, when a foundation proved rotten, you didn't try to repair it. You demolished everything and built something stronger. At 7:30 p.m., Luke arrived at the Riverside site. The building rose 12 stories into the darkening sky, its skeleton of steel and concrete standing like a monument to his professional success. Tonight, it would serve a very different purpose. Wilson's team had worked throughout the day, installing their special modifications. Security cameras now covered every angle, demolition charges were strategically placed, and electrical systems were ready to be controlled remotely. Luke positioned himself on the third floor, exactly where Craig expected him to be for the accident. He checked his watch, 7:55 p.m. In 5 minutes, Victoria and Craig would arrive for the final act of their 3-year plan. Instead, they would discover that Luke Shepard had been planning his own surprise for them. And unlike their carefully documented scheme, his plan had no intention of leaving witnesses who could later testify about what really happened in the Riverside building that night. The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot below signaled the beginning of the end. Luke had built his last foundation, but this one was designed to support justice rather than architecture. Chapter 4. The trap. Luke watched from the third-floor window as Victoria and Craig emerged from Craig's BMW. Victoria wore the same red dress from their dinner the night before, but now it looked like a funeral shroud in the pale construction lighting. Craig carried a large duffel bag that Luke assumed contained whatever tools they planned to use for sabotaging the building. Their body language spoke of intimate familiarity, Craig's hand on the small of Victoria's back, her leaning into him as they walked. Luke had never seen Victoria move with such natural comfort around another man, not even during their early courtship. The ease between them revealed years of secret intimacy. Luke activated his earpiece, connecting him to Wilson, who was positioned in a mobile command center outside the construction zone. "They're here, entering through the main access point." "Copy that, boss. All systems are ready. Owen and Gerald are in position." Luke moved to the stairwell, listening to Victoria's heels clicking against the concrete steps. Their voices echoed in the empty building shaft. "I still think this is too risky," Victoria was saying. "What if something goes wrong?" Craig's voice carried complete confidence. "Nothing will go wrong. I've planned every detail. The structural failure will look completely accidental, and with Luke's history of cutting corners on safety inspections, no one will question it." Luke's jaw clenched. He'd never cut corners on safety. His reputation was built on exceeding building codes. But Craig had spent 3 years studying his methods, probably preparing to testify about supposed violations after Luke's death. "And Emma." Victoria's voice held no maternal concern, only practical worry. "She's been asking about spending more time with Luke lately." "Kids forget quickly at that age," Craig replied dismissively. "In 6 months, she'll barely remember him. I'll be the only father she's ever really known." Luke's finger tightened on the grip of his Glock. These people had planned not just his murder, but the complete erasure of his relationship with the child he'd raised as his daughter. They reached the 3rd floor, their footsteps growing louder. Luke positioned himself behind a steel support beam, watching as they entered the main construction area. Victoria looked nervous, constantly checking her phone. Craig moved with purpose, setting down his duffel bag and removing what appeared to be small explosive devices. "Luke should be here any minute," Craig said, checking his watch. "Victoria, you need to get him positioned exactly where we discussed, near the northeast support column." "What if he suspects something?" Victoria asked. "He's been acting strange lately. More distant." Luke almost laughed at the irony. He'd been distant because he'd sensed their betrayal, but they interpreted it as normal behavior. How long had he been sleepwalking through his marriage? "He doesn't suspect anything," Craig assured her. "Men like Luke are too arrogant to believe their wives would outsmart them. He thinks you're his devoted little housewife." Victoria's laugh was cold and brittle. "If he only knew how boring he is." 9 years of his earnest lectures about building integrity and business ethics. "You're everything he's not, Craig. Exciting, dangerous, willing to take risks. After tonight, you'll never have to pretend to love him again," Craig said, taking Victoria in his arms. They kissed passionately, and Luke realized he felt nothing. No jealousy, no heartbreak, only a cold satisfaction that his assumptions about their relationship were confirmed. Luke stepped out from behind the support beam. "I hate to interrupt, but I believe you were expecting me." Victoria spun around, her face going white. Craig's hand moved instinctively toward his duffel bag, but stopped when he saw Luke's drawn weapon. "Luke," Victoria stammered. "You're early. We were just planning my murder," Luke finished calmly. "Yes, I know. I've known for several hours now, actually." Craig's eyes narrowed, his insurance adjuster's mind probably calculating odds and escape routes. "I don't know what you think you heard, but—" "I didn't hear anything," Luke interrupted. "I read your plans. All of them. Very thorough documentation, Craig. Professional quality work." Luke pulled out printed copies of the photographs from the storage unit and scattered them across the floor. Victoria's journal entries, Craig's technical reports, the DNA test results, everything. Victoria sank to her knees, staring at the evidence. "How did you find these?" "You got careless." Hiding evidence in Emma's birthday dress was clever, but not clever enough. Luke's voice remained steady, controlled. Did you really think I wouldn't notice irregularities in fabric construction? I've been examining materials for 15 years. Craig was studying the building layout, probably looking for escape routes. Luke, let's talk about this rationally. We can work something out. You're right, we can work something out, Luke agreed. Wilson, execute phase 1. The building's lights suddenly cut out, plunging them into darkness except for emergency lighting. Simultaneously, small explosions echoed from the stairwells above and below their floor. Craig pulled out a flashlight, but the beam only emphasized how trapped they were. What did you do? Craig demanded. I gave you exactly what you wanted, a structural failure, Luke replied. The stairwells are sealed above and below us. The elevator shaft is blocked. The only way out is through me. Victoria was hyperventilating. Luke, please. Emma needs her mother. Think about Emma. I'm thinking about Emma, Luke said coldly. I'm thinking about how you've been systematically erasing me from her life. How you've been preparing her for my death. How you've been planning to raise my daughter with a man who helped murder her father. She's not your daughter, Craig shouted, apparently believing honesty might save him. Victoria and I have been together since before Emma was born. You were just the sucker who paid the bills. Luke smiled, and even in the dim emergency lighting, both Victoria and Craig stepped backward. I know she's not my daughter, Craig. I've known since this morning. But I raised her, I loved her, and I protected her, which is more than either of you ever did. Luke moved closer, keeping the gun trained on Craig. You want to know what's going to happen now? You're going to sign confessions detailing everything you've done. Every plan, every betrayal, every lie. Then you're going to experience exactly what you planned for me. You're insane, Victoria whispered. You can't just murder us. People will look for us. Will they? Luke asked. Craig told his insurance company he was investigating potential fraud at my construction site. You told your sister you were going away for a romantic weekend. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, this building will be demolished and your bodies will be part of the foundation. Craig lunged for his duffel bag, probably hoping to reach a weapon. Luke shot him in the kneecap, and Craig's scream echoed through the empty building. Victoria's own scream joined his as Craig collapsed, clutching his shattered leg. That was for planning to kill me, Luke said conversationally. Would you like to know what the punishment is for betraying my family? Luke pulled out 2 sheets of paper and placed them in front of Victoria and the writhing Craig. Sign your confessions. Everything you've done, everything you've planned. Make it detailed. And if we refuse? Victoria asked through her tears. Luke's smile was cold as winter steel. Then I'll show you exactly how creative I can be with construction tools. I have all night, and Wilson's team has very specific instructions about what to do if I don't check in by morning. Craig was trying to tourniquet his leg with his belt, his face pale from blood loss and shock. Victoria stared at Luke as if seeing him for the first time. You're not the man I married, she whispered. No, Luke agreed. I'm the man you created when you decided to betray me. Sign the confessions. As Victoria picked up the pen with shaking hands, Luke realized that his old life was truly over. Tomorrow, Luke Shepard would cease to exist, and someone harder, more dangerous, would take his place. Victoria and Craig had wanted to destroy him, but instead they'd forged him into something far more ruthless than they'd ever imagined. Chapter 5. The Confession. Victoria's hand trembled as she wrote, her elegant handwriting revealing the depth of her deception with each line. Craig had fashioned a crude tourniquet from his belt, but blood still seeped through his pants, pooling on the concrete floor. His breathing was shallow, shock setting in from the gunshot wound. Luke positioned himself where he could watch both of them while maintaining visual contact with the building's exits. Wilson's voice crackled through his earpiece. Boss, we've got company. Police cruiser just pulled into the outer perimeter. Expected, Luke replied quietly. That's Gerald's contact. Officer Kerry Jameson owes me for the work on his house last year. He'll keep others away from the site for exactly 1 hour. Luke had anticipated that gunshots in an empty building might attract attention. Officer Jameson believed he was helping Luke deal with vandals on the construction site. The single patrol car would actually serve to keep other law enforcement away. After all, if there was real trouble, wouldn't there be multiple units responding? Read what you've written so far, Luke commanded Victoria. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. I, Victoria Shepard, confess to engaging in a 3-year affair with Craig Willard while married to Luke Shepard. Beginning in year 1 of our relationship, Craig and I began planning to eliminate Luke through staged accidents that would appear industrial-related. She paused, tears streaming down her face. Luke felt no sympathy. This woman had shared his bed, borne his name, and accepted his love while planning his death. Continue, he ordered. We documented Luke's construction sites to identify opportunities for fatal accidents. We researched his life insurance policies and business assets to maximize financial benefit from his death. We planned to raise Emma together after Luke's elimination, with Craig assuming legal guardianship through forged documents claiming paternity. Craig tried to speak through gritted teeth. Luke, you have to understand. Victoria and I love each other. We never wanted to hurt you personally. Luke's laugh was harsh. You never wanted to hurt me personally? You planned to murder me and steal my daughter. How exactly is that not personal? It was about money, Craig gasped. Your business is worth millions. The insurance policies alone would have set you up for life, Luke finished. I understand the motivation, Craig. What I don't understand is how you thought you could outsmart me on my own construction site. Luke walked over to Craig's duffel bag and emptied its contents. Along with the explosive devices, he found detailed floor plans of the Riverside building, a laptop computer, and what appeared to be falsified inspection documents bearing Craig's official stamp as an insurance adjuster. Very thorough, Luke commented, examining the materials. You even prepared fraudulent safety reports to support your version of events. How long have you been planning this specific operation? 6 months, Craig admitted, probably hoping cooperation might earn him mercy. We needed everything perfect. One chance. You're right about that, Luke agreed. You did have one chance. Unfortunately for you, I've had 3 years to figure out something was wrong in my marriage. Luke's phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer, William Manning. Documents filed as requested. Trust established for East custody arrangements in place if needed. Luke had spent the afternoon ensuring Emma's future was secure regardless of what happened tonight. His lawyer believed the arrangements were standard estate planning, but they would activate automatically if Luke disappeared or died. Victoria, finish your confession, Luke ordered. Include the DNA test results and how long you've known Emma isn't mine. Victoria's sobbing intensified, but she continued writing. I discovered I was pregnant 3 months into my relationship with Craig. DNA testing after Emma's birth confirmed Craig was the biological father. Luke never knew. I allowed him to raise Emma as his own while planning his eventual elimination. The cold calculation in her written words revealed Victoria's true nature. She not only deceived Luke about Emma's parentage, but had used his love for the child as a weapon against him. Now the personal details, Luke continued. I want Craig to understand exactly what kind of woman he's been planning a future with. Luke, please, Victoria started. Right about the other men, Luke interrupted. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually notice the charges on credit cards for hotels I never visited? The phone records is showing calls to numbers I didn't recognize. Victoria's face went white. Craig stared at her in shock despite his pain. What other men? Craig demanded. Victoria looked trapped between the 2 men she'd betrayed. There weren't. It was just... Tell him about Owen Cantu, Luke suggested helpfully. My demolition specialist. The one who's currently positioned outside this building with enough explosive charges to bring down the entire structure. Craig's eyes widened in terror. You're bluffing. Luke activated his earpiece. Owen, give our guests a demonstration. A small explosion echoed from somewhere far above them, followed by the sound of debris falling down the elevator shaft. The building shuddered slightly, and dust rained from the ceiling. That was just a taste, Luke said calmly. Owen has enough charges to drop this entire building into its own footprint. Very neat, very thorough, very permanent. Victoria was writing frantically now, confessing to affairs with at least 3 other men during her marriage to Luke. Craig's face grew progressively more shocked as he realized he'd planned a future with a woman who'd already betrayed him multiple times. Why? Craig asked Victoria. If you were with other men, why plan all this for me? Because you were the only one stupid enough to help murder her husband, Luke answered for her. The others were just entertainment. You were the useful idiot. Luke's assessment broke something in Craig's eyes. The man had genuinely believed Victoria loved him, that their relationship was special. Learning he was just another marketer long con was perhaps more devastating than the gunshot wound. Victoria finished her confession and slid the paper across the floor to Luke. It was comprehensive, every affair, every lie, every detail of their murder plot. More importantly, it would clear Luke of any involvement in their disappearance. Now Craig's turn, Luke said, placing a fresh sheet of paper in front of the wounded man. Craig's confession was more technical, detailing how his position as an insurance adjuster had given him access to Luke's policies and the ability to manipulate investigations after Luke's planned death. He described the systematic surveillance of Luke's construction sites and the identification of opportunities for staged accidents. But the most damning part of Craig's confession was his admission that this wasn't his first such scheme. He'd been involved in the suspicious death of another client 2 years earlier, a wealthy contractor who died in an apparent electrical accident at his own work site. You're a serial killer, Luke realized. This wasn't about Victoria at all. This is what you do. Craig met Luke's eyes with a mixture of defiance and resignation. Some people have more money than they deserve. I just help redistribute it. Luke felt a cold satisfaction at this revelation. He'd initially planned to simply eliminate 2 people who'd betrayed him personally. Instead, he was about to remove a predator who used his professional position to murder successful businessmen. Wilson, prepare for final phase, Luke spoke into his earpiece. Make sure the cleanup crew is ready. Victoria looked up from where she'd been sitting in stunned silence. Luke, what happens now? Luke checked his watch. They'd been in the building for 45 minutes. Officer Jameson would maintain his perimeter for another 15 minutes before having to respond to other calls. Now you both learn what happens when someone threatens my family, Luke replied. Even a family built on lies. He raised his gun, and Victoria's scream echoed through the empty building one final time. Chapter 6, The Execution. Luke's gun remained steady as he looked down at Victoria and Craig. The building around them was silent except for the distant hum of construction equipment and the occasional creak of settling steel. Before we finish this, Luke said, I want you both to understand something. I spent 10 years believing I had a family worth protecting. I built a business, a home, a life, all centered around people I thought loved me. You took that away. Victoria was hyperventilating. Luke, please. Think about Emma. She needs her mother. Emma needs stability and honesty, Luke replied coldly. 2 things you've never provided. She'll be better off with my sister Penny Neal and her husband. They've agreed to take custody if anything happens to you. Luke had spent the afternoon making these arrangements through his lawyer. Penny had been horrified by the evidence of Victoria's betrayal, but had immediately agreed to care for Emma. Unlike Victoria, Penny understood that children needed security, not just DNA connections. Craig was growing weaker from blood loss, but his eyes still held calculating intelligence. You'll never get away with this, Luke. Too many people know we were meeting you tonight. Actually, very few people know, Luke corrected. Victoria told her sister she was going away for a romantic weekend. You told your insurance company you were investigating potential fraud. Neither of you mentioned my name specifically. Luke pulled out his phone and showed them a series of text messages. These are from Victoria's phone, sent an hour ago. She's telling her sister how excited she is about her weekend getaway with her new boyfriend. How she's finally ready to start fresh somewhere far away. Victoria stared at the phone in horror. You sent those messages from my phone? Wilson's quite talented with technology, Luke confirmed. He also sent messages from Craig's phone to his insurance company, explaining that his investigation revealed no fraud, but that he's taking a few days off to pursue other opportunities. Luke had learned years ago that successful construction projects required attention to every detail. Eliminating Victoria and Craig was no different. Every loose end had to be tied up, every potential complication anticipated. The beautiful thing about modern technology, Luke continued, is how easy it is to create a digital trail that supports whatever story you want to tell. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, there will be evidence that you left town together voluntarily. Craig made one last desperate attempt to save himself. Look, I have money, offshore accounts, investments. Split everything with you and let us go. I don't need your money, Luke replied. I need justice. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed from outside. Wilson's voice came through Luke's earpiece. Boss, cleanup crew is here. Officer Jameson is departing on schedule. Luke nodded. Wilson had arranged for a demolition team that specialized in emergency structural assessments, buildings that needed immediate collapse to prevent public safety hazards. They'd worked with Luke on legitimate projects for years and trusted his professional judgment completely. Victoria, Craig, I want you to understand that this isn't about revenge, Luke said, his voice eerily calm. This is about consequences. You made choices that threaten my family and my life. Now you face the results of those choices. Victoria made one final plea. Luke, I know I hurt you, but I loved you once. That has to count for something. Luke considered her words carefully. You're right. You did love me once, probably. But love without loyalty is worthless. Love without honesty is worse than hate. You taught me that. Craig was losing consciousness for blood loss, but he managed one last whisper. What about Emma? What will you tell her? I'll tell her the truth, Luke replied. That her mother made choices that took her away from the people who loved her. That sometimes people aren't who we think they are. That she's loved and protected, and that's what matters. Luke raised his gun again, but paused as his earpiece crackled. Boss, we need to accelerate timeline. Police dispatch is showing increased chatter about the area. Luke made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of pulling the trigger, he lowered the gun. Wilson, initiate building collapse. Full demolition. Victoria's eyes widened in terror. You're going to bury us alive? I'm going to give you the same chance you planned to give me, Luke replied. The structure will fail exactly as you designed it. You'll have maybe 30 seconds to reach the stairwell before this floor collapses into the basement. Luke backed toward the sealed stairwell, keeping his gun trained on them. Of course, the stairwell is blocked, and Craig can't walk. But you're both intelligent people. I'm sure you'll figure something out. The building began to shudder as Wilson's demolition charges activated in sequence. Luke had designed the collapse to start from the top floors and work downward, giving Victoria and Craig just enough time to understand their fate before the structure failed completely. Victoria dragged Craig toward the sealed stairwell, desperately trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. Their panicked voices echoed through the building as Luke disappeared into a hidden maintenance shaft that only he knew about, a route he'd built into the structure specifically for this purpose. The last thing Luke heard as he descended through the maintenance shaft was Victoria screaming his name, not in anger or defiance, but in the pure terror of someone who finally understood they'd been outmaneuvered completely. Luke emerged from the building's sub-basement just as the upper floors began their controlled collapse. Wilson was waiting with a motorcycle and clean clothes. It's done, Wilson reported. Building collapse will be attributed to the structural weaknesses Craig documented in his reports. Ironic, really. Luke changed clothes quickly, washing construction dust from his hands and face. In 5 minutes, he would be Luke Manning, Wilson's cousin who'd been visiting from out of state. They had hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and witness statements to prove Luke Manning had been nowhere near the Riverside construction site. As they drove away from the collapsing building, Luke felt no satisfaction, no relief, only the cold certainty that justice had been served. Victoria and Craig had planned his death in the same building where they now lay buried. They'd gotten exactly what they designed for him. Luke Shepard had died in that building along with his wife and her lover. What emerged was someone harder, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to protecting what remained of his family. Emma would grow up believing her parents had abandoned her to start a new life elsewhere. It was a painful lie, but better than the truth about their plan to murder the man she called Daddy. Luke Manning looked forward to meeting his niece for the first time. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. 3 weeks after the Riverside building collapse, Luke sat in a diner 2 states away, reading newspaper coverage of the tragic accident that had claimed the lives of Victoria Shepherd and Craig Willard. The article described how insurance investigator Craig Willard had been conducting a routine safety inspection when structural failures caused the building's collapse. Victoria Shepherd was believed to have been visiting the site to discuss business matters with her estranged husband, who had not been present during the incident. Luke Manning, his new legal identity, complete with documentation Wilson had arranged through old military contacts, finished his coffee and studied the photograph accompanying the article. Emma stood between Luke's sister Penny and her husband Fernando Simon, looking small and lost but not devastated. She was adapting to her new family situation with the resilience that children possessed. According to the newspaper, Luke Shepherd had disappeared shortly after the incident, leaving behind substantial debts and a construction business in financial ruin. The article painted him as an irresponsible businessman who'd abandoned his daughter after his wife's tragic death. Luke allowed himself a grim smile. Even in death, Victoria had managed one final betrayal. The financial records Wilson had created made it appear that Luke had embezzled money from his own company and fled the country. No one would look for Luke Shepherd very hard, but wanted to find a man who'd apparently stolen from his clients and abandoned his family. His phone buzzed with a message from Wilson. Package delivered. Client satisfied with results. Wilson had found work with a private security firm that specialized in corporate problem solving. Luke had used his construction expertise to help design a completely undetectable surveillance system for a wealthy businessman who suspected his business partner of embezzlement. The system had provided enough evidence to send the partner to federal prison for 20 years. Luke discovered he had a talent for this type of work. His construction background gave him access to buildings that others couldn't penetrate, and his methodical planning style translated well to corporate espionage and security consultation. More importantly, this new career path allowed him to help people like his former self, successful individuals being betrayed by those they trusted. Luke's current job involved investigating Rogelio Jones, a successful restaurant owner whose wife had been systematically poisoning his food with small amounts of antifreeze, apparently planning to claim his life insurance after his death from natural causes. Luke had spent 2 weeks documenting her activities and would soon present evidence that would save Rogelio's life and send his wife to prison. The irony wasn't lost on Luke. He'd become exactly what Victoria and Craig had feared, someone who uncovered carefully planned deceptions and exposed them brutally. His secure phone rang. The caller ID showed P. Neal. Uncle Luke. Emma's voice was hesitant, but clearly happy to hear from him. Luke had arranged for Penny to facilitate regular phone calls between him and Emma. As far as Emma knew, Luke was traveling for work but stayed in touch because he loved her. She didn't know her mother was dead, only that Victoria had gone away and might not come back. Hello, Princess. How are you settling in with Aunt Penny? Good. She taught me to make cookies yesterday. Fernando is teaching me to play chess. Emma's voice grew quieter. When are you coming home? Luke's chest tightened. I don't know yet, sweetheart. My work is very complicated right now. Is it because Mommy went away? Aunt Penny says that sometimes adults make mistakes and hurt people they love. Luke closed his eyes. Penny was handling Emma's questions with wisdom and honesty, giving her enough truth to process the situation without destroying her innocence. Something like that, Luke agreed. But I want you to know that none of what happened was your fault. You are loved and protected, and that will never change. I know, Emma said with the acceptance that children showed for adult complications they couldn't fully understand. Aunt Penny says you're working to help other families that are having troubles like ours. Luke smiled despite himself. Penny understood exactly what he was doing without him having to explain. She'd always been the smartest of the siblings. That's right, Princess. I help people who are in danger from people they trust. Like superheroes help people. Something like that. After ending the call, Luke returned to studying photographs of Rogelio Jones's wife preparing his meals. The woman moved with the same calculated grace Victoria had displayed, the same false smile when her husband entered the room. Luke's new mission was simple: Identify people like Victoria and Craig before they could complete their plans and eliminate the threats they pose to innocent families. He became very good at it. Luke's current identity allowed him to move freely between states, taking contracts that interested him. He'd prevented 3 murders in the past 2 months. A businessman whose accountant was planning to kill him after embezzling funds. A wealthy widow whose nephew intended to poison her for her inheritance. And a construction worker whose wife was hiring contract killers with money from his life insurance policy. In each case, Luke had documented the evidence thoroughly before taking action. Sometimes the legal system handled the consequences. Sometimes Luke handled them personally. The new Luke Manning was everything Luke Shepard had never been. Ruthless, calculating, and completely unforgiving of betrayal. Victoria and Craig had wanted to destroy a trusting husband and father. Instead, they created something far more dangerous. Luke finished reading the newspaper article and left a $20 tip for the waitress. She was working 2 jobs to support her children after her ex-husband had abandoned them. Another situation that reminded him why his new mission mattered. As he walked to his motorcycle, Luke reflected on the strange satisfaction his new life provided. He couldn't save his own marriage or reclaim the daughter he'd lost, but he could prevent other families from suffering the same betrayals. Victoria had been right about one thing. Luke Shepard had been too trusting, too willing to believe in the goodness of people he loved. Luke Manning had no such weaknesses. He started his bike and headed toward his next assignment. Somewhere in the next state, a family was being threatened by someone they trusted, and they needed the kind of help only Luke Manning could provide. The man who'd once built homes had found a new purpose, protecting the families that lived in them. Chapter 8. The Hunter. 6 months after Victoria's death, Luke had established himself as one of the most effective security consultants in the underground network Wilson had introduced him to. His reputation was built on 3 qualities. He never failed to identify threats, he never left evidence, and he never allowed sentiment to compromise his missions. Luke's current assignment was his most personal yet. The client was Victoria's sister, Rebecca Mosley, who had contacted him through intermediaries without knowing his true identity. She believed her husband was planning to kill her for her inheritance. Rebecca had no idea she was hiring the brother-in-law she thought had abandoned his family after Victoria's death. Luke had accepted the contract specifically because it offered an opportunity to tie up the last loose end from his former life. Luke observed Rebecca's husband, Jeffrey Spencer, through high-powered surveillance equipment from a rented apartment across from their suburban home. Jeffrey was a pharmaceutical sales representative with access to untraceable drugs and a gambling addiction that had consumed most of Rebecca's family money. What made this case particularly interesting was that Jeffrey had been Victoria's lover before Craig. According to the evidence Luke had gathered, Victoria had introduced Jeffrey to Rebecca specifically to give him access to the Mosley family fortune. It was another layer of Victoria's deception that had infected multiple families. Luke's earpiece crackled with Wilson's voice, targets moving, heading toward the pharmacy where he works. Luke had been tracking Jeffrey's activities for 2 weeks, documenting his theft of controlled substances and his meetings with a contract killer named Cameron O'Neill. Jeffrey's plan was brutally simple. Drug Rebecca with a paralytic agent, then stage her death as a home invasion robbery gone wrong. But Luke had a different plan for Jeffrey Spencer. Luke's phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number. "Mr. Manning, I need to accelerate our timeline." Rebecca's voice was strained with panic. "Jeffrey's been acting stranger lately. I think he knows I'm suspicious." "What kind of behavior?" Luke asked, though he already knew. Jeffrey had discovered evidence of Rebecca's investigation into his activities. "He's been asking about my will, my insurance policies. He suggested I update my emergency contacts. And," Rebecca's voice broke, "he's been making my coffee in the mornings. He never did that before." Luke's blood chilled. Jeffrey had accelerated his timeline and was probably already administering small doses of poison to test Rebecca's reactions. "Mrs. Mosley, you need to leave your house immediately," Luke instructed. "Go to a public place and wait for my call. Don't eat or drink anything your husband gives you." "I can't just leave." Where would I go? To your sister Penny's house. I'll contact her and explain you need a safe place for a few days. Luke had maintained contact with Penny throughout his new career. She'd become his anchor to the family he'd lost. And more importantly, she was one of the few people who knew exactly what he'd become and why. After arranging Rebecca's safety, Luke activated the final phase of his plan for Jeffrey Spencer. Unlike Victoria and Craig, who had died in the building collapse, Jeffrey would face a more personal reckoning. Luke used his construction expertise to enter Jeffrey's pharmacy after hours, bypassing security systems that most intruders couldn't handle. He replaced Jeffrey's stolen drugs with harmless placebos and installed microscopic cameras throughout the building. Then Luke waited. Jeffrey arrived at work the next morning to find Luke sitting in his office, wearing a construction worker's uniform and reviewing pharmaceutical records. "Who the hell are you?" Jeffrey demanded. "How did you get in here?" "Security consultation," Luke replied calmly. "Mrs. Mosley hired me to investigate threats to her safety." Imagine my surprise when I discovered her husband was planning to murder her. Jeffrey's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Luke spread photographs across Jeffrey's desk. Images of Jeffrey meeting with Cameron O'Neill, stealing drugs from the pharmacy, and researching untraceable poisons online. "I also discovered something interesting about your relationship with Victoria Shepard," Luke continued. "How you introduced her to Craig Willard. How the three of you have been working together to identify wealthy targets." Jeffrey sat down heavily, realizing the scope of what Luke had uncovered. "Yeah, that security guy Wilson recommended. I heard you were good, but this is impossible." "Nothing's impossible if you have the right skills and motivation," Luke replied. "The question now is what happens to you." Luke pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This contains the same paralytic agent you've been testing on Rebecca, except this is a full dose. Fatal in approximately 30 minutes. Jeffrey backed toward the door, but Luke had already secured it from the inside. "You have two choices," Luke explained. "Option 1, I inject you with this drug, and you die slowly while I watch. Your death will be attributed to accidental exposure to pharmaceutical chemicals." "What's option 2? Jeffrey asked desperately. "You disappear. Tonight. Leave the country and never contact Rebecca or anyone else from your old life again. In exchange, you get to live." Jeffrey was calculating odds, probably wondering if he could overpower Luke. Luke was smaller, but had been hardened by months of dangerous work. More importantly, Luke had Wilson positioned outside with additional security. "Why offer me a choice?" Jeffrey asked. "Why not just kill me?" "Because you're not worth becoming a murderer over," Luke replied honestly. "Victoria and Craig planned to kill me and steal my daughter. You're just a pathetic man who married for money. Running for the rest of your life is sufficient punishment." Luke tossed Jeffrey a passport and airline ticket. "Flight leaves in 4 hours. New identity, clean documentation. Wilson's work." Jeffrey examined the documents with growing amazement. "This is perfect. Professional quality. Wilson has many talents," Luke agreed. "But understand this, if you ever return, if you ever contact Rebecca or anyone else from your past, I will find you. And next time, there won't be a choice." Jeffrey gathered a few personal belongings and headed for the door. He paused to look back at Luke. "Who are you really?" Jeffrey asked. "This isn't just about Rebecca." Luke met his eyes with cold finality. "I'm someone who protects families from people like you. That's all you need to know." After Jeffrey left, Luke called Rebecca to inform her that the threat had been eliminated. He didn't provide details about how, and she didn't ask. Clients who hired Luke Manning learned not to ask questions about his methods. Luke also called Penny to let her know Emma could expect a visit from her Aunt Rebecca, who would be dealing with her husband's sudden disappearance. Penny would help Rebecca understand that sometimes people left without explanation, just as Victoria had done. As Luke cleaned up Jeffrey's office and removed all traces of his presence, he reflected on how different this resolution felt from Victoria and Craig's deaths. Jeffrey had been given a choice because his betrayal, while cruel, hadn't threatened Luke's family directly. But the underlying message remained the same. Luke Manning protected families, and he eliminated threats to them. The methods varied depending on the circumstances, but the outcome was always the same. The hunter had found his purpose, and that purpose was justice for families destroyed by betrayal. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year after the Riverside building collapse, Luke stood outside a small school in suburban Oregon, watching Emma play during recess. She'd grown taller, her dark hair now reaching her shoulders, and her laugh carried across the playground as she chased friends in a game of tag. Emma had adapted to her new life with remarkable resilience. Penny and Fernando had legally adopted her 6 months ago, and Emma now called them Mom and Dad. She still remembered Uncle Luke fondly, but the trauma of losing her birth parents had faded into the background of childhood memory. Luke maintained regular contact through birthday cards, Christmas presents, and occasional phone calls, but he was careful not to disrupt the stable family life Penny and Fernando provided. Emma was loved, protected, and growing up with the honesty and integrity that Victoria had never possessed. Luke's phone buzzed with a message from his latest client. Contract complete. Payment transferred. Thank you for saving my family. Luke had just finished his 15th successful assignment, preventing a wealthy tech entrepreneur's wife from poisoning him with digitalis extracted from foxglove plants. The case had taken 3 weeks to document and resolve, ending with the wife's arrest and the preservation of another family. Luke had found his calling in this work. Each successful case felt like atonement for the years he'd spent blind to Victoria's betrayal, unable to protect his own family from the threats living within it. Wilson approached from across the street, carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose work had gone perfectly. Client satisfied, Wilson reported. Wife confessed to everything once confronted with the evidence. Apparently, she'd been planning this for 2 years. What triggered her decision to accelerate? Luke asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Same thing that triggered Victoria: greed and impatience. She'd found a younger man who promised her a more exciting life, and murdering her husband seemed easier than divorce proceedings. Luke shook his head at the familiar pattern. In his year of working these cases, he'd learned that betrayal followed predictable patterns. Greed, lust, and the desire for a fresh start motivated most domestic murder plots. What's our next assignment? Luke asked. Wilson consulted his encrypted phone. Interesting one. Wealthy businessman in Texas. His teenage son is apparently planning to kill him for inheritance money, possibly with help from the boy's mother, the man's ex-wife. Luke's expression darkened. Cases involving children always hit harder, probably because of Emma. But he learned that age didn't necessarily correlate with innocence. Some teenagers were perfectly capable of calculated murder. Send me the files, Luke decided. If a kid is planning to murder his father, that needs to stop immediately. As they walked away from the school, Luke caught one last glimpse of Emma. She was sitting with a group of friends, animated and happy, completely unaware that the man she remembered as Uncle Luke was watching over her from a distance. Luke had spent years believing family was about blood and DNA. Now he understood that family was about protection, loyalty, and love freely given. Emma had a real family now, people who would never betray her trust or use her innocence as a weapon. That knowledge made everything Luke had done, and everything he continued to do, worthwhile. Luke's secure phone rang. The caller ID showed E. Shepard. Uncle Luke. Emma's voice was bright with excitement. Guess what? I won the school science fair. My project was about building strong foundations for houses. Luke's chest tightened with emotion. That's wonderful, princess. Tell me about your project. I learned that the most important part of any building is the foundation. If the foundation is strong and honest, the whole building will last forever. But if there are cracks or weak spots in the foundation, everything falls down. Luke smiled, recognizing his own teachings in Emma's words. Penny had obviously been sharing some of his construction wisdom with Emma. That's very true, Luke agreed. The foundation is everything. Mom says you're still traveling for work, helping families with their houses, Emma continued. I told her I want to do that too when I grow up. Help families build strong foundations. That's a noble goal, Luke said softly. Families need people who understand how to protect them. After ending the call, Luke reflected on Emma's innocent wisdom. She was right about foundations, They had to be strong and honest to support everything built on top of them. Victoria and Craig had tried to build their future on a foundation of lies, betrayal, and murder. That foundation had collapsed, taking them with it. Luke had built his new life on a different foundation: justice, protection, and the elimination of threats to innocent families. It was a harder foundation, built from painful materials, but it was honest in its own way. Emma would grow up in a family with a strong, honest foundation. She would never know that her biological parents had planned murder, never understand that the man she called Uncle Luke had become something dangerous and necessary to protect families like hers. But she would grow up safe, loved, and protected. That was what mattered. Luke climbed onto his motorcycle and headed toward the airport. Texas awaited, and with it, another family that needed protection from betrayal. The work was never finished, but Luke had found purpose in the endless cycle of identifying threats and eliminating them. Luke Shepard had died in the Riverside building collapse, buried under the weight of Victoria's betrayal. But from that destruction, something stronger had emerged. A man who understood that some foundations could only be built from the rubble of what came before. The hunter had found his mission, and he would continue it until there were no more families left to protect. Behind him, Emma's laughter echoed across the playground, the sound of innocence preserved by the man who had learned to be ruthless in its defense. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.